Franz Xaver Messerschmidt is one of the fascinating figures in the history of art. His background was conventional for an artist of the 18th century, and yet he produced one of the most thought-provoking, disturbing series of busts in the history of art. He was born in a small city, Wiesensteig, in the area that was then part of the Protectorate of Bavaria. He trained with his uncles, who were quite a famous dynasty of sculptors, the Straub family, first in Munich and later in Graz. And then he went, as any talented artist at the time did, to the Imperial Academy of Painting, Sculpture, and Architecture in Vienna, where he also had the good fortune to train with some of the better-known sculptors of the day, one named Moll, for example, and the director of the academy, a man named Martin van Muytens, took an interest in Messerschmidt, recognized his talent, and protected him, which is always very important in the career of an artist. And Muytens also got Messerschmidt's first job, which unusually was in the arsenal in Vienna. So his first job was making cannons. He worked with various kinds of metal, not just bronze, which one associates with fine art, but lead, different kinds of tin alloys in decorating cannons between 1760, 1763. And so this is very interesting as a background. It's conventional. He worked with family sculptors. He trained in an academy. And then what is slightly unusual to have had this industrial background of working with cannons. And from that, he was commissioned to make busts of the two most important figures in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Empress Maria Theresia and her consort Frances Stephen. So in the mid-1760s, suddenly he was catapulted to fame. His career took off, and he began making busts in a style that was prevalent at the time. This is a period known as the Baroque in the history of art, and so the portrait statue, for example, that he made of the Empress Queen Theresia in Hungarian dress shows her in all the pomp and circumstance of the period, a grand flowing dress full of movement, rather precisely portrayed but with great power. These are the hallmarks of the Baroque style: movement, pomp, grandeur. And so this is Messerschmidt by the mid-1760s. He's become one of the leading sculptors in Vienna. In 1765, Messerschmidt goes to Rome, which is the destination of all artists who want to improve themselves in Europe at this time, to go to the Eternal City to study Roman antiquity, which was revered above all art forms during this period. And so Messerschmidt studies there with a group of then young artists from all over Europe. Artists such as Houdon and Clodion from France, for example, are just beginning their careers and learning from one another and taking lessons from antiquity, which in their case, and particularly in Messerschmidt, involved doing away with the overly dramatic, the billowing form of the Baroque, and simplifying a much more concise form, a much clearer approach to their subjects, very direct rather than diagonal. And so Messerschmidt takes these lessons when he returns to Austria, and one begins to see a change in his style. His busts become very, very simple, very direct. Often there are no pupils in the eyes, for example. They're blank, the kind of expressions that he would have seen from Roman imperial busts, for example. And then there is a kind of cataclysmic event that happens in Messerschmidt's life that is debated to this day.
he's meant to play an important role in that official circle at the academy, and but very quickly he acts very strangely, and on a personal level, his reactions are sort of weird, considered very weird. And then there's one important element in his career. I think he expects to be appointed, has a special position, the chair of the at the academy, and he's passed over. Basically, he doesn't get it. And it's a moment of great crisis for him.
He sells all his belongings in Vienna. He leaves the capital, and he goes first back to his birthplace, to the small town of Wiesensteig, and eventually he settles in the city that was then known as Pressburg. Today is known as Bratislava in the Slovak Republic, and spends the last years of his life there. He dies early. He dies about age 47. And in the last years of his life, when he's left the capital, he's mostly on his own, he still has some formal commissions. So he clearly wasn't completely crazy, but he concentrates most of his efforts on a personal project. This project that engrossed him in his last years is the subject of this exhibition, and the head that's behind me is one of the heads which he referred to as Kopfstücke, headpieces or character heads. That was his obsession in his late years, a very personal project, the meaning of which is hotly debated, but I think all of us can agree that it's one of the greatest, most intriguing series of sculptures that were created in the 18th century. And it was something he did for himself. There was, at a certain point, we gather, an offer from Albert of Saxe-Teschen, who was the governor of the region in which Messerschmidt was, and one of the most distinguished art patrons of his day, an offer to buy for an enormous sum of money the entire series of character heads, which Messerschmidt refused. So it was clearly something that this artist was doing for himself. And we know that he completed some 69 of these heads.
Most of them have received strange names, like the Yonner or the Hanged Man. And all these names were not given by Messerschmidt himself, but were given 10 years later, posthumously, in an anonymous publication in 1793. Some of these names are completely absurd, like the incapable bassoonist or afflicted with constipation, and have distorted the historiography of the sculptor's work, and also the complexity of his research. He was obsessed and thought that he was inhabited by evil spirits. And what he would do, he would look at himself in the mirror and pinch himself, and as a result, make all sorts of deformation in his face, all sorts of grimaces and rictuses. Interestingly enough, he was not so much interested in his likeness, in what he actually looked like. And there are, as a result, a number of confusions about his work, because it is thought to be, all of them thought to be self-portraits, which they are not. Busts that looked alike what we think Messerschmidt looked like, and I think his bust of the artist imagining himself as laughing is probably the most accurate description of what the sculptor looked like. The fact that Messerschmidt is wearing a hat and not a wig is also interesting and quite unusual at the time, where everyone was wearing a wig in public. The second characteristic, which makes this bust different from the others, is that the artist represented himself laughing. And this is quite a departure from the classical tradition, where if you wanted to show someone who is happy, you would show him smiling, but certainly not laughing. It's the only head also that expresses the feeling of satisfaction, and I would say even more than satisfaction, a contented triumph. In fact, at the end of the 19th century, the expression laughing like a Messerschmitt was a proverbial expression that was used to describe someone who was laughing easily.
Any portraitist, anybody interested in making a portrait, is thinking about one thing, and it's a very old idea, which is that there's a relationship between character and appearance. And if you look at a caricaturist, a contemporary really of Messerschmitt's, somebody like Hogarth called the face an index of the mind, which means that the mind and whatever is happening in the mind, be it good or bad, eventually makes its way onto the face.
For example, Charles Lebrun, a 17th century painter, had a lecture that was later published called the Traité de la Passion, or a theory of passions, which rather oversimplified expressions. So for fear, for anger, Lebrun would do a drawing that would show how your face should reflect that emotion. And as a good academician, Messerschmitt trained in the academy, he taught in the academy, he would have known theories such as Lebrun's. So Lebrun had a whole series of schema of how the face reflects these different emotions.
What we see in terms of the development of scientific illustration towards the end of the 18th century is a transition from an earlier attempt to represent the typical of a species, to represent the ideal, right, this imagined type. And this goes back to what I was saying about the theory of preformation, of a vital force driving the development of the individual organism as characteristic of its species. That even a monster could somehow show the beauty of the preformative principle. At the same time as Enlightenment philosophers are asking, what is it, most fundamentally to be human, what is it that we have in common, they are also more and more interested in individual peculiarities, in personalities, and how do we identify character on the basis of external form. We could also relate that effort to be able to kind of see into a person's individual nature to these new public spaces in which strangers are more and more encountering one another, trying to make sense of one another. The coffee house, the salon, the theater, right, where people may be looking at other members of the audience even more than they're looking at the stage. They looked at images of people, they looked at each other, and they speculated about what those facial features had to say about a person's character.
It's likely that Messerschmidt knew Lavater's theories. Lavater knew Messerschmidt. Even though the theories were published only beginning in 1775, after Messerschmidt had begun his own bust series. More to the point is the work of a Viennese physician named Franz Anton Mesmer, who was a neighbor of Messerschmidt. Messerschmidt apparently lived with Mesmer for a period of time in the late 1760s, beginning of the 1770s. And Mesmer is one of these physicians who we probably would call a quack today, but was taken rather seriously, even if his work was very much debated, and was enormously popular at the time.
In many ways, Mesmer was characteristic of the trend of sentimental empiricism of the 18th century, of this desire to combine scientific observation with feeling. And specifically, Mesmer argued from the start that there is in our bodies an ethereal fluid that responds somehow to external nature. So in his 1766 thesis, for which he received his medical degree in Vienna, he argued that this ethereal fluid responds to the motion of the planets. In some ways, this was a move characteristic of the 18th century to bridge physiology, the body, with Newtonian science, celestial mechanics.
There is in the Louvre a bust by Messerschmidt of a man who has a strip of metal over his mouth. And there are several others that have these pieces of metal. These seem to reflect the cure that Mesmer had. And by the way, our term today, to mesmerize, comes from Mesmer's name, because he used hypnosis and curative baths as part of his cure. So one can imagine Messerschmidt, this curious sculptor, living with, knowing the Dr. Mesmer, seeing many of these patients who were in various states of mental distress, witnessing them, perhaps himself having a kind of mental breakdown, and all of this coming together in his experience of the world and in the way that he composes this series of busts. As complex as the meaning of this series may be, and it will be long debated, there's no question what it's all about. In the end, the reason that we keep coming back to the series of Messerschmitt's heads is their formal power, their power as works of art. He takes a movement that is in the air in the 18th century and goes beyond that. He is an artist who is struggling to try to achieve something, and he did achieve something that really is apart from almost anything else in the history of art.
It's a lot like Rembrandt. Rembrandt was at his deepest when he was doing self-portraits because he didn't have to worry about pleasing a subject. Messerschmitt obviously wasn't concerned in his later work, the work that we know him best for, with how he came across. He comes across as an extreme man. The contrast between Messerschmitt's late work, the work that we know, the intense psychological portraiture, and his earlier work is marked. It almost shows that he single-handedly made the leap from typical Baroque portrait to something that approached a modernist approach by himself. His earlier portraits are all about the drapery, the gesture, It's almost like the head is an afterthought. On his famous self-portraits, it's the head. In fact, I like the fact that he doesn't use shoulders. He doesn't have any twist to it. But somehow they're incredibly expressive without all of those traditional flourishes of portraiture.
What's interesting also about the series is Messerschmidt's choice of materials. He has this absolutely simple contour, often very taut lines in the features, the wrinkles of the face, but he softens those with the kinds of materials that he uses, either a lead or a tin alloy, not bronze, which was the preeminent material used for fine commissions in the 18th century, but rather a softer metal that tends to dissolve some of the tautness that he's working on. Or he uses a stone, an alabaster, which is locally available in the region around Bratislava where he was. There were quarries available, but it's a very a stone that chips easily, that spalls, that loses its outer surface. And so all of the heads in the series are either in this very soft metal or in this very soft stone. So this was clearly a deliberate choice on his part to almost work against the sharpness of detail which he was seeking in his work. And the other attraction of using a tin alloy or a lead as opposed to bronze is that he could then work in the cast surface of the metal and punch into it. So, for example, the scalp that you see in the head here is the result of punch marks, where he's just gone in and made a kind of repetitive series of punch marks to suggest the scalp of this head.
They are very similar to the intensity that you see in Amarna period Egyptian portraits. Somehow removed from our world, but they are intense. There's full sculptures in the round, too.
When I was, I think, 14 or 15 years old, I was at the Belvedere in Vienna, and at the Upper Belvedere, and I was looking at Klimt and Sheila, as I did all the time. As I was leaving, I noticed that there was another part of the Belvedere that I never went to. And I just sort of walked down there, and there was an exhibition, and there were the 5 Messerschmitt heads. I looked at them, I could not believe. First of all, I thought they were contemporary art. And then by chance, I looked at the date. I realized this is not contemporary. These are fabulous pieces from over 200 years ago. I said, who is this artist? I went into the Belvedere bookstore, and there was a book about Messerschmitt. I bought it, looked at it. I left the book in the bookstore. I went back to see them. Then went back to the book, went back to see them. First of all, they thought I was doing something illegal, but I realized that how contemporary this artist was. But I realized also that I knew nothing about him. And at that time, it was not possible to see them in other museums, because most museums did not have Messerschmitt.
I didn't know Messerschmitt's work when I started making portrait sculptures. Messerschmitt is not included in any of the major art historical treatises. The classics like H.W. Jansen, Gardner, Gombrich, Hart don't include Messerschmitt. He has suddenly come charging into everybody's consciousness in the last decade. Many contemporary art shows have been based around the comparison of contemporary artists to Messerschmitt. I remember an incredible show at Hyman Reed Gallery in New York that paired the sculpture of Louise Bourgeois and about 10 Messerschmitt heads, and that was my first encounter with the work, and I felt like I found a fellow traveler.
The thing is that contemporary artists today are able to do that with an enormous amount of freedom. There are basically no constraints. In fact, we take as a given the idea that an artist is somebody who's supposed to be working without constraints. The more out of the mainstream something looks, the more successful it's likely to be. And that's exactly the opposite of the situation that existed when Messerschmitt was making work. There's a long tradition of artists using or taking themselves as a subject and performing in one way or another and assuming various kinds of roles and then painting themselves in those roles. In the case of a contemporary artist like Cindy Sherman, photography, taking pictures of herself, photographing herself in various roles. This idea of holding up in the studio and with nothing but oneself and trying to just essentially seeing what comes out and seeing what the artist is able to do with, not with working with traditional materials, but just working with their own boredom and exasperation and whatever happens to be in the room. And the one thing an artist always has with them is their own body.
How can one sum up Messerschmitt's series of busts? The most interesting thing is that there is no clear definition of what it means. It has attracted numerous theories, ranges from the purely psychological to the more art historical. There have been many, many different interpretations. And what's fascinating of this series, as of all great art, is that it allows all of these different interpretations. It's almost impossible to say exactly what they mean. But what he has left us with is a series of 40-some busts out of the 69 that he created originally. 40-some have survived, that are a series. And that's one of the important things about this exhibition, is that it allows a group of them to be put together. Each one is powerful in its own right, as the one behind me is. But for Messerschmitt, they clearly were part of a series. So whatever their meaning is, it is part of the totality, of looking how one leads to the next, how they are all interrelated. And one also can see this searching mentality of the artist who begins with what is a fairly natural approach to his own human physiognomy and pushes it further and further, reducing it more and more, so that there's this constant tension between his natural observation and his reductive simplicity as an artist that makes the series one of the most hypnotic of the 18th century.
I hope the public who sees this Messerschmitt exhibition will have the same emotional response that I did. But one thing I learned about Messerschmitt, although you can see pictures of it, it's better and stronger to see the real thing. Certain paintings you can see with production, you get a lot of the feeling. With the Messerschmitt, you have to go up there and feel it and look at it before you really understand it. And once you understand it, you realize what a brilliant person this was, who was Messerschmitt, who was doing the sculpture. Because there was no precedent for it.